All right, folks, it is July of 2025, and we are continuing our series on the DFARS cybersecurity series of clauses. We've done episodes on DFARS Clause 7012, DFARS Provision 7008, and today we are moving on to one that doesn't get very much attention, but you might come across when you're digging through all the information on guidance to contracting officers and things like that. It is DFARS Clause 252-204 7009, limitations on the use or disclosure of third-party contractor reported cyber incident information. And why is this important? One of the biggest concerns that people always have in their public comments on cyber incident reporting requirements is the fear that their data won't be protected once it's handed over to the government once a cyber incident happens and the investigation is actually underway. If the government requires you to report cyber incidents, as we have learned in our investigation of DFARS 7012, and then they decide to use a contractor to investigate your system, what assurances do you have that they will be restricted on the use and disclosure of that information related to your incident? When DFARS 7012 was expanded to include more incident reporting requirements for defense contractors handling the DoD's information, the government included a related clause that addresses that exact issue, DFARS 7009, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so a lot of times when it comes to the reporting of incidents, when it ever does happen, right, there's that incessant fear that the information that they pass over is going to open up some floodgate, that this is a vulnerability in our system and keep attacking us here until we can fix it, right? And then there's that other fear that the companies have of that public scrutiny, right? One of the biggest things that we see happening from especially these companies that do this remediation from cyber incidents is like after action reports that kind of name it, case studies and things of that nature. And I think the last thing somebody wants to do is to know that, you know, that embarrassment to constantly live in infamy in some sort of case study. And I think that that's part of the fear that stops people from reporting incidents.
Yeah, it's always the same thing, no matter how many times it is addressed, no matter how many times the government reminds people that you are not going to be held liable for reporting cyber incident information, and your cyber incident reporting information will be protected when it's provided over to the government. It's been like that for a really long time. Still comes up in public comments, but that's why we're going to talk about DFARS 7009 in the realm of defense contractor cyber incident reporting, because that's its entire purpose. So
maybe that small sliver of the reputation with the government, right? Like, oh, now Jacob's company has been breached. They're less reliable of a contractor.
Yeah, I mean, people are still nervous about reporting incidents because they don't want to have the issue with their relationship with the government. And a lot of times they'll mask that concern by saying, well, we're worried about reporting our information in general. On paper, that's what DFARS 7009 is there for. But I've never really heard anybody talk about it. You never see anybody really discuss it. It's kind of tangentially related to the main obligations in 7012, but it is part of the rule that was created when 7012 was revised. So to for the sake of completeness, we're gonna talk about it. So quick history lesson.
Oh, I keep interrupting you, but the clause that is essentially like your mom saying, if you tell me now, you'll be in less trouble, but if I find out later, it's going to be a big deal, right?
Yeah, sure. All right. Quick history lesson. So DFARS Clause 252-204 7012 was originally created in 2013 after a long rulemaking process that, it originally started like in late 2010, early 2011. We got the original version of 7012 in 2013. In 2016, it was suddenly revised via what's known as an interim final rule. Interim final rules are a big deal because that means that the government is issuing a regulation without first taking public comments and adjudicating those comments. They are issuing a regulation without asking anybody. That's very rare and requires a lot of waivers and doesn't happen very often. And they did it with this cybersecurity rule that created 7012 as it exists in your contracts to this day. And so, in the rule in 2016, they say this action is necessary because of the urgent need to protect covered defense information and gain awareness of the full scope of cyber incidents being committed against defense contractors. So what happened? Why was it so urgent? What are they talking about? They didn't do anything for years after the 2013 rule was done. And then all of a sudden they went, oh my God, we got to have the send out an interim final rule immediately, right? So why was it so urgent? Well, for those of you who don't remember or weren't around, there was a massive data breach at the Office of Personnel Management. Up until SolarWinds, this was like the worst, the biggest, the controversy in terms of government data breaches. This was executed by the Chinese Ministry of State Security, and it was a treasure trove of information about everybody who has ever worked for, tried to work for, or currently worked for the United States government, up to and including all of their SF-86 clearance investigation information. It was a massive deal. Google it, ChatGPT it, whatever people do these days. It's a huge deal. It wasn't really all that long ago. The former director of national intelligence, James Clapper, said, you have to kind of salute the Chinese for what they did. If we had the opportunity to do that, I don't think we'd hesitate for a minute. So the DNI, given this Ministry of State Security, their props for pulling a fast one over on everybody. Anyways, massive, terrible, horrible data breach. Much of that breach happened in contractor and cloud systems. And at that time, there was basically no regulation of those systems in DoD contracts at all, outside of the fledgling 2013 version of DFARS 7012. Like there just weren't really requirements for this stuff. So the rule that was issued in 2016 did more than just expand DFARS 7012 to include more incident reporting obligations. 7012 was updated to point to NIST SP 800-171 requirements, which the 2013 version did not. And it was updated to include FedRAMP equivalency requirements. The reason why it talks about FedRAMP equivalency is because the government got spanked via cloud systems that were completely unregulated, because they found out that contractors, like the ones working for OPM, were just throwing this sensitive information into cloud systems with little to no requirements on them. And then whoopsie daisy, the Chinese government has
what could
all
go
of
wrong,
it, right?
Yeah, what could go wrong?
In addition to those changes to 7012, which is what gets most of the focus for most contractors, the rule created the provision 7008, which we did a whole episode on. It created DFARS 7009, which we're going to talk about shortly. And it created DFARS 252239 7010. These are requirements for cloud systems that are being operated on behalf of the government. It's like you're running a cloud system for a government agency. Defense contractors listening to this podcast who are just receiving information and processing it on their systems doesn't apply to you. We'll talk about 7010 in the future.
Those are government-owned contractor-operated systems.
Exactly. Yeah.
GoCo.
Exactly. So the rule in 2016 did a lot more than just change up 7012, and 7009 was one of those things. So if you read 7009, it's very, very short. It starts out just like the rest of the clauses and provisions in this DFARS cyber series. It says in 204.7304, which are the instructions to the contracting officers, it says use the clause 252.204.7009 in all solicitations and contracts for services that include support for the government's activities related to safeguarding covered defense information and cyber incident reporting. So this is different than what we've talked about in the past. 7008, 7012, 7019, 7020, that says include in all solicitations and contracts, right? So these are going out in all solicitation contracts when you're dealing with the DoD's controlled information. This clause 7009 says put it in all solicitations and contracts for services that include support for the government's activities, right? So this is where the difference starts to set in. So you probably don't have 252.204.7009 in your contracts, or you shouldn't, because you're not supporting the government's activities for incident reporting, incident investigation, and things like that. A lot of these clauses end up accidentally, but this is why you may not have seen it. Okay.
So this is one that directly, not like 7012, that's wide splattered on everything. This is one that if you've seen it out in the wild, more than likely it was a mistake. Is that what you're saying?
For the people listening to this podcast,
Yeah,
because
sure.
this is primarily going to be for people who are cybersecurity companies, cybersecurity in doing incident response, incident cleanup, analysis, outsourced contractors doing security monitoring and things like that.
What about like
When they're
penetration
supporting,
testing and things like that?
yeah, when they're supporting the government's incident cleanup,
Mhm.
investigation, all that incident analysis type of work, they have obligations for protecting information. When you're a contractor handling the DoD's information, you have obligations for protecting the DoD's information, but you're not necessarily on contract to the government to do a cyber incident analysis, right?
For sure.
And that'll become more clear as we go through the paragraphs here. There's only a couple of them. It's one of the shortest ones that's in this series. Paragraph A, just like the rest of them, starts out with the definitions that we all know and love. What does compromise mean? What does controlled technical information mean? What does controlled defense information mean? What is a cyber incident? These are the same definitions that you'll see in 7008, 7012, 7019, 7020. The world starts to become much smaller once you realize that they all share the same definitions and they're all at the very start of those clauses and provisions. Check out our episodes on 7008 and 7012 if you want us to go into more of those, but you should know these. They're important. They're relevant to everybody and to all the clauses. Okay. The meat of the clause here, paragraph B, restrictions. The contractor agrees that the following conditions apply to any information it receives or creates in the performance of this contract that is information obtained from a third party's reporting of a cyber incident pursuant to DFARS Clause 7012 or derived from such information obtained under that clause. So you, a cybersecurity company, agree to the following conditions when you are performing a contract handling information obtained from the reporting of cyber incidents pursuant to 7012. So I'm a defense manufacturer. I experience a cyber incident as defined in these clauses related to my system that's processing the DoD's covered information. I report that incident within 72 hours. Let's say the government is working with a contractor to analyze that report or investigate that report or whatever. So this is extending obligations onto that company that they've contracted with when they're dealing with this cyber incident.
So just to kind of sum up what you said there and kind of what this represents and who this pertains to. When I, as a defense contractor, in accordance with my 7012 requirements, report an incident to the DoD, the DoD is going to analyze that incident, and they're going to say, you need some more help. The companies that they contract to come in and give me more help in the cleanup of my incident, this would be a clause that's applicable to their contract.
It could be cleanup. It could be the initial investigation. It could be the analysis. We don't know, right? So does the DoD have an army of cyber analysts?
Right of doom activities?
Yeah. So is it every, is the DoD contracting with a company to sort through these reported incidents? Is it always DoD employees that are reading the incident reports? We don't know. If the DoD is using contractors handling that reported information from you to the government, those contractors have to protect this information because it's sensitive. That's the whole concern that comes up in public comments. People are like, I don't want to have to report incidents because you might give that incident information to a cybersecurity contractor and I don't know what they're going to do with it. I don't want them to have that information or whatever. This is what that clause is saying, that cybersecurity contractor has obligations to protect it.
Got it.
So they say, okay, well, you have agreed to these conditions that will apply to you. And it says the contractor shall access and use the information only for the purpose of furnishing advice or technical assistance directly to the government in support of the government's activities related to DFARS 7012, and it shall not be used for any other purpose. Can't use this information for your annual threat assessment report. Can't use this information whenever you're, doing marketing campaigns. Can't do any of this other stuff. You are only using this information for furnishing the technical assistance that you're on contract to the government with related to these reported cyber incidents. They say that the contractor shall protect the information against unauthorized release or disclosure. Pretty standard, pretty understandable. And the contractor shall ensure that its employees are subject to use and non-disclosure obligations consistent with this clause prior to the employees being provided access to or use of the information. This is very similar to what defense contractors are agreeing to in DFARS 7008 and 7012, when the DoD says, when you're handling our technical information, you have to protect it. You have to not use it for other purposes. Your employees have to be aware before they have access that it is sensitive information that needs to be controlled. Similarly, when the government is contracting with cybersecurity companies to help with cyber incidents, they're saying, hey, when you're handling that incident information, it's controlled. And so you have to make sure your employees are aware. You can't use it for other purposes, so on and so forth. So it's the other side of the coin, right? You've got all these obligations to implement NIST SP 800-171, FedRAMP monitor equivalency, report incidents. Once you report the incident, you're creating this information. That information is also protected once the government's handling it, which is part of DFARS 7012, and when their cybersecurity contractors might be handling it, which is DFARS 7009.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of alluding to, kind of in the intro, is that one of the biggest hiccups is the actual reporting of incidents from defense contractors to the DoD, right? And part of that is the reputational damage, which they think they're going to, that could potentially happen if the information is unnecessarily leaked. And I think that their belief is that when they provide that incident information over, that it turns into one of those case studies. And this clause particularly protects that from turning into that, right?
Yeah.
It stops you from becoming a headline unless you make yourself a headline by not reporting or making the breach worse than it is and things of that nature.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good point. So how, I mean, that's what it said, but how does it do that? Theoretically, if we keep going through the clause, it'll tell us what's the stick here that is the punishment if I breach this agreement. So what happens if they breach these obligations, right? So later on in the clause, it says, if you violate this clause and these obligations, the contractor may be subject to criminal, civil, administrative, and contractual actions in law and equity for penalties, damages, and other appropriate remedies by the United States, and civil actions for damages and other appropriate remedies by the third party that reported the cyber incident as a third party beneficiary of this clause. So the government's going to come after you. The company that reported the incident to the government because they were required to via 7012 is going to come after you. So don't use the information for anything other than just helping the government during the cyber incident.
And what's different from those penalties that they're subjected to as a part of this than the penalties from the CCFI is the word criminal, right? Like that's a civil, like, and now you can get criminal penalty. You can go to jail for violating this one.
Yep, absolutely. And then just to round it out, like
you'll go to jail for messing this up.
Going to prison. So just like all the other clauses and provisions that we've talked about, the last paragraph is the flowdown paragraph, which is called subcontracts. This flows down to subcontractors if there are any, just like 7012, 7008, 7019, 7020. In the future, the provision and the clause for CMMC, all of these clauses and provisions in this DFARS cyber series, if the data that is relevant to the obligation in that clause and provision flows from you to a subcontractor, you are obligated to flow the requirements to protect that data down to those subcontractors, and so on and so forth until you get to the turtles all the way at the bottom. Does that happen? I don't know. Should it happen on paper? Yes. And that's how they all work. They're all going to have these subcontract flowdown provisions, and that's DFARS 7009. It's pretty straightforward. Doesn't come up a lot, mostly because it doesn't affect the people who are on the hook for 7012 99.9% of the time, but it is related to you under the thumb of 7012, because once you report the incidents that you're required to report, what happens to your incident reporting information? What happens to that information about your company and what happened and all this stuff? Everyone's always very concerned in their public comments. DFARS 7009 is there to alleviate your concerns in your public comments, and it's been there for almost 10 years.
The safety blanket for your reputation in case of a breach.
There you go. And it says that if they do breach that, then you can go after them. So, alrighty. Well, that's 7009. We will talk about 7010 in the future. We're going to talk about 7021 in the future and the provision that goes along with CMMC. Should be before our upcoming event. Summit 7 Labs is putting on Secure the Dib. We do an awesome event every summer. It's coming up in August, so we'll have that up on the screen. Registration links below, putting out new information. I think we're at like 36, almost 40 companies that are Summit 7 clients that have gone through CMMC Level 2 assessments. So we're putting out what we've learned, what we know, common mistakes, things like that, what's going on with rulemaking, all that great stuff in the middle of the summer doldrums when we're not getting a lot of updates from the DoD. So check that out, and we'll see you next week.
Free virtual event, low travel costs. See you next week.